Superman's latest villain in the Absolute Universe is a cybernetically enhanced Peacemaker. So today we're breaking down Absolute Superman issue number 8, which completely reinvents the man committed to maintaining the peace by any measures necessary. With that being said, for those of you who don't remember, the last issue consisted of Brainiac's brutal and painstaking upbringing as a level 0 effector, where he tirelessly shoveled dying Brainiacs into a liquidator for over 130 years, until noticing that the dying Brainiacs stopped coming in through the disposal chute. So he broke out of the liquidator room by prying the doors with his shovel and then scoured the ship from top to bottom, hoping for an explanation as to why the liquidator room was so quiet lately. But sooner than later, he'd realized that the higher ranking Brainiacs were dead for some unexplained reason, which allowed him to promote himself to the highest rank achievable, in addition to gaining access to the Brainiac Collective, where he'd eventually go to obtain answers about Superman's origin, which also included secrets about Superman's greatest weakness. And then on the last page, we were left with a cliffhanger, discovering that he'd been operating on Peacemaker Smith to eventually deploy him into Smallville, Kansas to take Superman down with some kryptonite bullets. This issue, on the other hand, starts off blazing hot, with a group of Omega men attempting to assassinate Ghul while he's in the middle of a phone call with his investors. And the first thing you'll notice is that Raish looks freaking huge, and a lot different than the last time we saw him in issue 6. And unfortunately, we're not given a straightforward explanation as to why, but I'm pretty sure we'll find out soon in one of the future issues. Anyways, right from the get-go, one of these assassins leaps into the air, jamming a knife directly through Raish's forearm. But somehow Raish was completely unaffected, launching his fist into the assassin's face mask with so much force that it completely shattered, while telling his investors, "Ladies and gentlemen, you know the year's numbers. Record profits, growth in every quarter, expansion into 18 countries. You've heard it all before, but here is something I suspect you haven't heard." He'd then grab the assassin by his throat and start crushing his windpipe while saying that is the sound of an assassin, sent by those who would dismantle everything we've built, an agent of the Omega Men. And while lifting him into the air, he says, "I thought you might like to listen as I kill him." And after doing exactly that, he'd then casually rip out the knife in his arm, as his assistant expressed that the investors were very pleased with his actions in case he couldn't hear them. Just moments later though, his brutal display of strength would carry onward, as one of the Omega assassins desperately shouted that he was just a man that they needed to kill in order to save the planet. But not taking them seriously in the slightest, Raish would then jump over the couch and clobber one of them into the wall, while explaining how he turned Lazarus Corp into such a vast empire, stating that he started the company almost 200 years ago, and once things were up and running, their first order of business was building a railroad that took Metropolis from nothing to the city of tomorrow. After that, he put yet another assassin in his place, booting him inside his personal Lazarus pit and activating it immediately, while further elaborating on his hopes and dreams, indicating that he never thought he'd live long enough to fulfill his company's goal of resurrecting the world, but somehow here he was. Then, while pulling out a blade to eliminate the last assassin, he brought up a story that he heard as a child that initially inspired his creation of Lazarus, a tale about a man who was raised from the dead by the Son of God, before using the blade to slice his opponent's head off, and emphasizing that he was the only person that realized the planet was dying, exclaiming that him and him alone was responsible for stopping its overpopulation and bringing it back to life. But now, thanks to the advancements they had gained from Project Brainiac, the day of resurrection was close at hand, giving Lazarus the opportunity to rise from its tomb, remade and reinvigorated like a newborn baby. And while manifesting this success, he then walks over to his Lazarus pit, revealing that the Omega assassin was a baby. And upon picking him up, he walked over to his city view balcony, expressing that he used to strike fear into the masses while he was known as the Demon's Head, but now that he was reborn, he preferred going by the God's Head, the god with the power to heal the lame and save the planet. However, there was one thing he regretted, which was the fact that he didn't have a son to help him on his mission. And in the midst of saying this, he then literally drops the child off the edge before giving one last word to his investors. Until next quarter, my dear friends at the League of Shareholders, Lazarus means salvation. Lazarus means sustainability and the power of sacrifice. Lazarus means hope. Our story then finally switches the focus in the setting by shifting things over to Martha's retirement home in Smallville, Kansas, where Cal pays her a visit for the first time ever since being separated on the farm because of Lazarus Corp. During their interaction, Cal tried telling her about his various journeys across the planet, indicating that he found a place in the Arctic Ocean called Svalbard that was pretty quiet overall, but he was confident she'd like it there because at night the sky shined with a countless number of stars just like back on the farm. However, moments later, Cal realized something was wrong, because upon giving her some seashells he collected from all 5 oceans, it was clear that Martha didn't remember him when she started freaking out and calling to her her late husband John in belief that she was being attacked by an intruder. So Cal was dishearteningly forced to flee the scene and blast his way out of the window, only to realize that he was being followed by Jimmy and Lois again upon walking through the city streets. It's here that both of them try explaining why they needed his help, but Cal didn't care for either of their reasons, stressing that whatever they needed help with didn't matter because the answer would always be no. Nevertheless, Lois was persistent and continued trying to convince him that she could be trusted, claiming that she was there all alone and that Lazarus wasn't involved. But being a part of the Omega Men, Jimmy expressed how foolish she was for thinking Lazarus would grant her any freedom, promising that they were tracking her location and stating that she had no idea what the Brainiac algorithm was capable of. Amidst their argument and ignorance though, they realized that they were both foolish because somehow Superman managed to slip away seemingly out of nowhere. But hoping that he was still listening from somewhere nearby, Lois then claimed that she knew why he kept coming back to Smallville, stating that over the years there had been miracle after miracle in this city. The first one happened 3 years ago when a church caught on fire, only for that fire to freeze just moments later, which ended up saving everyone involved. Then, 2 years ago, a school bus full of kids was somehow dragged from a lake with no one around. But the miracles didn't end there, because last year, a family on Hutchinson Road swore they were pulled to safety from inside of a literal tornado. She knew that Cal was responsible for everything, and it was all because of how much the Kent farm meant to him before Lazarus ripped it away. And ever since then, he'd been searching for a place to belong and someone that he could trust all over the world, and she believed that maybe she could be that person. However, moments later, she lost all hope, certain that Cal was long gone as Jimmy criticized her and the company she worked for, exclaiming that the only reason Superman had to fight for Smallville in the first place was because Lazarus bought every inch of it just to build their super farms where people were now paid in Lazarus crypto on the same lands they used to own. So Superman was far from likely to ever trust somebody like her because of the master she served. Sooner than later though, both of them were caught by surprise when Cal actually came back, indicating that the real reason he came back here was to stop himself from killing Peacemaker Smith after he murdered a bunch of innocent people in Pakistan. But before he could further elaborate, things took a devastating turn for the worst as a green bullet sped right through the center of his chest, causing him to fall down to his knees instantaneously as Lois and Jimmy turned around, realizing it was shot by Lazarus Corp peacemakers. And while they both were aware that they needed to get him to safety as soon as possible, things quickly turned into a Western standoff because Jimmy didn't want Lois involved because her people were responsible for doing this and he believed she led them here intentionally. Soon after that though, Lois was convincing enough to make Jimmy cooperate, indicating that Superman was a miracle and that if they let him die at their feet right now, they'd regret it for the rest of their lives. So they started carrying him to safety as fast as possible, although a successful escape didn't seem likely because Lazarus was hot on their tail thanks to Superman's trail of blood. And then the matter was made even worse just seconds later when none other than the newly modified Peacemaker Smith himself arrived on the scene, demanding that his lower-ranking soldiers secure the perimeter and kill whoever's helping Superman get away. Now, eventually, the unlikely trio was able to sneak inside of an old drugstore to hide temporarily, but that doesn't mean that things weren't a mess because not only was Cal's suit Soul having an extremely difficult time removing the bullet from his body, but Lois and Jimmy couldn't come to an agreement when it came to where they were taking him next, and their lack of progress was only contributing to the Peacemaker's gain in progress, which was made clear when Peacemaker Smith smashed his way into the building after tracking the kryptonite bullet. On the next page, he then cranked things up a notch and tried showing Superman who was boss, grabbing him by his suit and then smashing him through a different wall until daring him to laugh at him like the people back in Pakistan until bashing his face in over and over again. Unsurprisingly though, Cal refused to back down despite being drained of a significant amount of power. So much power in fact that Soul expressed this fight could possibly be his last. Letting up wasn't an option for Cal though, so he dished out blow after blow and gave it all he had, but after taking 2 monstrous blows to the chest and his face, he was once again in no position to defend himself. After that, Lois and Jimmy tried evening the playing field to the best of their ability, demanding Smith to stand down right away while keeping him directly in the middle of their iron sights. But upon being surrounded by all the other peacemakers just moments later, it was clear that they stood no chance, even after Lois tried using her authority in Lazarus to arrest Peacemaker Smith for his actions back in Pakistan, because none of the peacemakers bothered to listen to her orders. Anyways, as Superman laid on the ground seemingly neutralized and helpless, one of the peacemakers suggested they start apprehending him because they were ordered to bring him to Lazarus Corp alive. Peacemaker Smith, on the other hand, had something else in mind, grabbing his comrade by the throat because he wasn't fond of taking orders and implying that Superman needed to be dealt with now now while they had the chance. Unfortunately for him though, focusing on his fellow agents and letting his guard down was a huge mistake, allowing Cal to dispatch a monster left hook to his face before stating that he should have stayed away from Kansas. It's here that we see Cal debuting some all-new insane looking battle armor, but maybe even crazier than that is the fact that he also debuts something called Tornado Mode, a massive disbursement of red sunstone dust that sends all the Peacemakers flying, including Peacemaker Smith. Soon enough though, upon Cal ordering his opponents to stand down or else he'd stop holding back, Peacemaker Smith was able to regain the upper hand by blasting him with yet another kryptonite bullet, and this shot was even more devastating than the last, causing Soul to completely malfunction and lose its ability to perform a system reboot. And unfortunately, Peacemaker Smith wasn't finished just yet, then cracking Cal in the head with the butt of his pistol before attempting to end his life once and for all. But almost immediately upon aiming his weapon at Cal's head, none other than Brainiac himself remotely intervened, shocking Smith with a massive burst of electricity before conveying that he needed to remember his place because Superman wasn't supposed to be killed. It's here that Jimmy and Lois are given a window of opportunity to shift the odds in their favor, with Lois asking Jimmy if he knew a way to save Cal, and Jimmy hesitantly claiming he did. He then reached out to his fellow Omega men, stating that he needed a boom tube so they could evacuate, and once the boom tube arrived, Primus along with an Omega task force came flooding onto the scene where they fought off all the remaining Peacemakers until getting Superman inside. However, because of Lois's ties to Lazarus and their previous showdown, Primus refused to let Lois tag along, forcing her to stay behind in Smallville, Kansas, where she was quickly surrounded by her fellow teammates and forced to answer for her betrayal. But sadly, that's where this issue comes to an end, but if you guys want to see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.